This video is about the ancient philosophy of Stoicism, and in particular 4 points that I think will help to walk the Camino, ride your bicycle or do just about anything else. I think the best way to explain it is with a story about the British politician Boris Johnson. Boris was cycling through London when he hit a pothole. The impact was so hard that the frame of the bicycle was broken. Boris fell off, he landed on the road and was nearly hit by a taxi that was following behind him. Boris wrote about the incident, but he didn't complain about it. He didn't accuse a taxi driver of driving dangerously close. He didn't dwell on his near-death experience or blame the quality of the road, although as the Mayor of London at that time, he couldn't have been too critical of the council. Here is what he wrote. "I bounced up again, as we old rugby players have learned to do, a millisecond before the taxi behind me could organise a swift election." In Boris's mind, he's not the victim, he's the hero of the story. He's only concerned with his own actions. He did what he thought was right, and he's quite chipper about the whole situation. So here are the 4 key aspects of Stoicism and how they apply to the story: perception, thoughts, deeds, and reason and learning. Perception. Boris's description of the events reflects how he perceives the world and his place in it. He does not complain about anyone or anything. It's not that he thought, well, maybe somebody else was to blame, but it's not worth the hassle of trying to blame them and getting the compensation. In his world, it doesn't even dawn on him that anyone or anything else could affect him. Thoughts. Since Boris doesn't think of blaming others, he hasn't become angry. He isn't thinking about compensation from anyone. He's not angry at the taxi driver or the council. He seems to be quite upbeat about the whole thing. Quite often, trouble comes from people not only feeling the physical injury of an incident, but also the insult. Boris's thoughts and peace of mind are quite safe from the acts of others. So he has a peaceful mind because his happiness does not depend on anyone or anything else. Also, he sees himself as a hero. Rather than being worn down by the episode, he has proved to himself that he does the right thing when he needs to. Deeds. Boris is the master of his own destiny, a hero who, despite all, wins through. His physical bounciness and quick actions are what save the day, and that is the only thing that matters. Reason and learning. We don't see this in the instant because Boris has already got his thoughts straight, but we'll think about that a bit later on in the video. Good people should act so as not to fear troubles and difficulties, nor be dismayed at their fate. Instead, they accept whatever comes and force it to become a blessing to them. It doesn't matter what you bear, but how you bear it. Pilgrims on the Camino, like Boris, have their own challenges to endure. My theory is, when they arrive in Santiago, they're celebrating the triumph of overcoming hardships. Snoring, tired legs and other random disasters. Like Boris, they've achieved something heroic through their own qualities. There's no point in complaining on the Camino. There are thousands of pilgrims all putting up with the same things. You can't expect much for a €5 albergue or an €8 meal. However, it's much better if your understanding of the world means you don't even think about complaining. Most pilgrims might not be experts on Roman Stoicism from the 1st century AD, but the Camino is full of people who get on with it, accept the hardships without complaint, and each day grow a little through their endeavours, many not realising they were enduring hardships, but took them to be important parts of the Camino that they wanted to experience. Walking distances day after day, sleeping in dormitories, communal meals, they're all important part of the Camino experience. If you had to live that way every day for the rest of your life, a lot of people would think their lives had taken a turn for the worse. But the perception that people have of the Camino means they accept it and think it's a good thing. Given the Christian aspects of the Camino, it might seem strange applying a Stoic view to it, but St. Paul used Stoic terms and metaphors in his letters. And so much Stoic writing has come down to us because the Christian monks were interested in the ideas and preserved them. The 2 best known Roman Stoics, and I think the most useful, are Seneca and Epictetus, and I'm going to rely on their writings to explain things. So here's a bit more on Stoicism. Just like children who are afraid of the dark, adults living in ignorance are living in darkness. They stumble around afraid and not daring to live. Acquiring knowledge brings the light that enables us to see the world for what it is. For Stoics, understanding the world and our place in it is very important, and the best way to do this is by reason and learning. When I first thought about doing the Camino, I was in darkness about it, so I investigated and I made these videos. Whatever the problem, it's best to solve it by thinking. After all, our ability to think is what makes us different to the other animals. Here is my plan for dealing with trivial disasters. Number 1, I would sit down and have a think, because most troubles in the world can be solved by thinking. This simple idea has a big impact, because from now on, we mustn't live by what is customary or expected, but instead each of us has to live as we think best. The things in our control are by nature free, unrestrained, unhindered. But those not in our control are weak, slavish, restrained, belonging to others. Stoics believe the only thing we can fully control are our thoughts and deeds. Everything else depends on other people and things that are beyond our control. If our freedoms and happiness depend on other people, then everything is difficult and troubling. Once we no longer depend on others, then they have much less leverage over us, and it becomes much easier to think our own thoughts and do what we want to do. It's quite easy to blame other people and get angry with them. Being only concerned with our own behaviour stops that anger. The biggest problem on your walk is going to be yourself, because quite often you'll be tired and it'll be a new situation and you're with yourself all the time. It's your job to look after your passport and your money and all your other things. Once we have control over our thoughts, we have a peaceful and happy mind. After all, who would choose to be unhappy? Happiness and freedom begin with a clear understanding of one principle. Some things are within your control and some things are not. Now, question number 3, are there too many people travelling? I think the answer is probably yes, but because it's one of those things you can't control, it's also one of those things it doesn't do to worry about. Let the mind not be concerned with the business of others, nor depend on their approval. Let it enjoy a tranquillity undisturbed by either public or private troubles. Any person capable of angering you becomes your master. They can anger you only when you permit yourself to be disturbed by them. Demand not that things should happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do happen. Whatever happens in the real world, it's only our perception of it that makes it good or bad. For humans, what an event means to them is more important than the thing that has actually happened. Complaining that the world is not how we would like it quite often means we don't understand how the world works. For example, death is sometimes seen as a bad thing, but since it's part of nature, it's better for us to accept it. In fact, since Stoics can't do anything about death, to them it's neither good or bad, because we only concern ourselves with things we can control, which are our thoughts and deeds. Accepting the world as it is certainly a much easier way to have a peaceful mind than trying to change the world. With regard to the tenderly beloved, if you embrace your child, wife or husband, you embrace a mortal. Remind yourself of the nature of life, and if they die, you can bear it. 2,000 years later, here's the current advice from Mind, which is the UK mental health charity. Why do certain things make me feel stressed? It depends on many factors, including your perception of the situation. The Stoics measure themselves not by their material goods nor the things that happen to them. Instead, they measure themselves by how they respond to events. You start to see people's true character Quite often you see people limping along and really struggling, and when you speak to them, they refuse to get the bus or to get a taxi. Our deeds, after all, depend on the previous 3 precepts: learning, not depending on things we can't control, and perceiving things in the right way. If we don't have any challenges on the Camino, then we won't get to try out our new Stoic principles. I think Stoics can tell if they've had a good Camino when they've got lots of stories to take home of how they overcame challenges, rather than stories of how nice the food and weather were. The Camino is an adventure, so if you have a disaster, then you're getting extra adventure for free. The more serious the problem, the more important it is to think in the right way. It's almost inevitable that each one of us will find ourselves in a potentially life-changing situation at least once in our lives. How we respond to that will affect how we see ourselves in years to come. Acting properly, in line with our Stoic values, is acting virtuously. Sometimes Stoicism is seen as something to do with enduring suffering and pain, but it's much more gentle than that. If it's not in your nature to do something, there's no problem if you don't want to do it. Anything virtuous is a middle between 2 extremes, e.g. courage is halfway between timidness and recklessness, and simple living is halfway between austere and luxurious living. Here's an example of a British government minister so ashamed that he arrived late for a meeting that he offered his resignation to the Prime Minister. Certainly the minister valued his conduct more highly than ambition, so he was trying to act virtuously, but I think in this case it might have been a bit too extreme. That's the theory, so now let's crank things up a bit. Did you know that 60% of the UK think the roads are too dangerous to cycle on? Here's some film from my bicycle. I've added some music and edited it to try and increase the blood pressure. I think some of these drivers are going past too close and too fast. I'm holding other people's faults in front of our eyes. It's a good way to make people angry. Stirring up the emotion seems a popular way to increase clicks to websites or view counts on YouTube. However, as good Stoics, we're not going to fall for such cheap, lazy tricks. So let's instead test out our new Stoic principles. First of all, we start with reason and learning. The risk of death and serious injury mile for mile for someone riding a bicycle is higher than someone in a car, especially on country roads. But academics researching the subject always find that the health benefits from cycling far outweigh the risks. By comparison, the risks of inactivity are much higher. 1 in 6 people in the UK dies prematurely from inactivity. Plus, each year, 40 to 50,000 people die through air pollution, much of which comes from motor vehicles. And while we're on the subject, 1/4 of all the UK's greenhouse gases come from transport. Cycling is good for the heart and lungs, but also because it's an outdoor activity, it's good for the mind. I don't know how far these drives are going, but in Britain a significant number of journeys could easily be cycled. Even in London, which has very high levels of public transport and cycling, 1/3 of all car journeys are less than 2 kilometres. Why don't more people cycle? I wonder if it's because they're living in what us Stoics would think of as darkness. They see the sensational stuff in the news and they don't live their lives by science and reason. Many people in the UK say they would like to cycle or walk more, but they're afraid of the busy roads. So, a great proportion of the people in Britain are living in fear of something that runs outside of their house and they have to use every day. So us Stoics might say they're afraid because of ignorance, and many of them, through inactivity, will die prematurely. So, We've done our research, now we need to get our thoughts straight. Here I am on my bicycle, legs working, heart pumping, lungs gasping, eyes and ears sensing the environment, brain planning ahead on the lookout for troubles, blood full of oxygen, adrenaline and glycogen. This is probably one of the few times a day when I live in a way that is more or less natural for a human. Meanwhile, people in cars suffer stress hormones, raised blood pressure, and they don't even have the sky above their heads. In fact, travel by car is so common that I think people have forgotten how easy it is to walk or cycle even quite long distances. The generally held view is that the car has set us free, but I wonder if it's starting to hold us back. In the rain, people run from their house to the car, afraid to get wet. I feel sorry for people in cars. So far so good, but you have to admit some of the cars are going past quite close and quite fast. It's fair to say that if they did that on their driving test, they might not pass. It's not considerate, and I think it increases risk. But as Stoics, we're only concerned with our own behaviour. Certainly we don't hold other people's faults in front of our eyes, and we try not to keep our own faults behind our backs. I cycle each year about 5,000 kilometres, during which time tens of thousands of people must overtake me. It's likely I will never see most of them again. Even the ones who live near me or travel at the same time of day, I probably won't pass them that often. But for the whole 5,000 kilometres, I'm always going to be there. So if anyone's going to make a mistake and cause a collision, out of the tens of thousands of people, it's likely to be me. Fortunately, it's easy to correct my faults, and I get almost all of the benefit because I'm always there. But even if I flagged down one of the cars and explained to the driver why I'd like more space, and they agreed and drove like that forever, I might not see them again. So although somebody would get the benefit, admitting our sins is the first step to salvation. If we always find excuses rather than admitting them, we close our minds to the truth, we never understand the world and our place in it, and have no hope of ever finding a peaceful mind. Here I am confusing the driver behind me by changing lane at the last moment. He got a bit cross. Here I am leaving the braking a bit late in the wet, so I nearly ran into the back of a van. And here I am confusing another cyclist by cycling on the wrong side of the cycle path.
I'm going right.
So as Stoics, we try to ride as well as we can. We read the highway code, we do our best. Much better to improve ourselves than getting angry at other people. In any case, it's pointless to be angry at one person for a fault that's common to so many. So the real Stoic test, does cycling make me happy? Most people ebb and flow in wretchedness between the fear of death and the hardships of life. They are unwilling to live, and yet they do not know how to die. For this reason, make life as a whole agreeable to yourself by banishing all worry about it. No good thing renders its possessor happy unless their mind is reconciled to the possibility of loss. Nothing, however, is lost with less discomfort than that which, when lost, cannot be missed. Therefore, encourage and toughen your spirit against the mishaps that afflict even the most powerful. So those are the basic principles, but what about things specific to the Camino? Well, a simple life, halfway between austerity and luxury, is the best way for a Stoic to live. It's generally healthy, and it doesn't rely on a lot of resources that would mean we would need to work hard to buy things that we don't really need. A life dependent on luxuries and pleasures can cause us to spend too much time working for and thinking about things that aren't really worth the trouble. People only want these sorts of things because they don't understand the world and they don't understand themselves. But at the same time, a life that's austere is bad because it involves the deprivation of things that we need to be happy and healthy. I think the Camino might be too hard to be considered to be a simple life, but you can use your Stoic values to help you walk it, because they can help you to get your thoughts straight, ready for both the daily routine and the difficult times. However, simple pleasures that can be had at no great cost are fine, because they bring happiness without causing the problems that the more powerful pleasures bring. You go without so much on the Camino that you need to have some treats, and food is still one of those pleasures that you can enjoy. By all means, be kind to other people, but just as importantly, remember to be kind to yourself. So after you've had a bocadillo and a Diet Coke, why not treat yourself to some cheesecake and another Coke? Why not stop more than once? I'm quite sure some people would find the Camino a simple way of living. Maybe they don't mind the snoring so much. Maybe they have the patience to walk a little less far each day so they don't get so worn out. Maybe they'd get more out of it mentally than other people. But that's fine. We should all live our lives according to our own natures. Each person must walk their own Camino. If pilgrims can get their thoughts straight so that each day they build themselves up a little by having the right perceptions of the world and acting virtuously, then as the Camino progresses, they'll build themselves up rather than wearing themselves down. And like Boris, they'll arrive as heroes and masters of their own destiny when they get to Santiago. Walk your own Camino. It's the one time in life when you really are free to be yourself and not to please anybody else. Each person's perception of the Camino and what it means to them is different. Some see it as a spiritual endeavour, others as a physical challenge. When I walked the Camino, quite often people told me how I should do it. Some people told me not to walk so far or not to walk so fast. Some people told me I should walk further or not to carry so much weight. One person complained that I wasn't doing the Camino properly because I'd started to think about life after the Camino, which meant I wasn't living in the moment, which she didn't approve of. Helping other people and sharing information is fine, but it's probably best not to encourage someone else to try and walk the same Camino as you. As the days and weeks pass, people become tireder. From time to time you hear cries of dismay about how far they still have to go and how tired they are. People become less patient and less forgiving. It's likely that your memories of the Camino and how you measure yourself will be based on your deeds at this time. Before you go, think about the things that might happen, good and bad, and try to imagine what you would do in those situations. Everyone loses something on the Camino at one time. If you lost your guidebook, what would you do? Have you got some photographs of the routes on your phone as a backup? If it's very cold or very hot, would you have the right stuff? How would you get money if you lost your wallet? How much money can you hide in your rucksack? Martin Luther King described this as a process of self-purification. You think about what you're about to do, you get your thoughts straight, you prepare for any outcome, and you dedicate yourself to what you've decided to do. Although people are sometimes said to be being stoical after the disaster, in practice, most stoical thinking goes on before the disasters happen. How you get on with other pilgrims depends on them, so we don't worry about that. We can all control our thoughts, but only to a certain extent. Being stoical isn't a macho thing. If you're finding something hard, then maybe it's against your nature to be in that situation. I found it quite hard sleeping in the dormitories with all the snoring and having to go to bed at a set time. Other people seem to cope with less fuss and slept much better. So don't make your troubles worse by heaping blame on top of your troubles. If you can, laugh at the predicament you've managed to get yourself into. Given that any sensible person would choose a nice holiday in a luxury hotel, seeing the ridiculousness of a situation should be quite straightforward. Any sensible person would take the train. If you lost all of your money, your passport and your phone, that would be really funny. So, that was Stoicism. No one ever achieves the Stoic ideals. Learning about them is quite easy, but living up to them is much more difficult. However, the process of trying makes us better than we otherwise would be. There are a couple of ways, though, to notice if some progress is being made. The first thing is a joy that comes from within, as people throw off the things that once caused them stress and worry. After a while, it just becomes an obvious way to see the world. If you are interested, you can find Seneca's and Epictetus's writings online. You might be thinking, good, some of the Stoic principles will help me on the Camino or when cycling, but it's the other way round. Walking the Camino, or cycling, helps us understand the Stoic principles, which in turn helps us to get our thoughts straight. And when you get your thoughts straight, you have this great peace of mind, and then you experience this inner joy. The distinctive and natural property of virtue is to rejoice and be glad. If you have any comments, then please let me know. But otherwise, thanks very much and goodbye.